of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Chistero. Chapter 69. Picture Perfect. Monday afternoon had seen the majority of his hectic morning forgotten. Sure, he still needed to talk with his boys, but all things considered, he'd count today as a win. And the study group assembled with Inko and Mitsuki on approach at 18:30. He had excused himself when he'd seen them coming to head back upstairs to their apartment to grab the t-shirts he'd purchased for them the previous week. All of the tots would be having non-uniform days at some point during this final week of schooling, and well, they were a team, and so not that he'd tell them what to do with the All Might branded tops. He thought it might be fun for them to match, even though they were on different schools. Plus, he couldn't treat just Hitoshi and not the rest of them, really. He had grown so fond of each child, all of them endearing, all of them special in their own ways. He just hoped that the camaraderie would last. That any fallings out they could have in the future could be handled in the ways he'd been trying to teach them, for when he was not that much older than them, he'd seen that anger and cruelty being met with anger and cruelty never got anyone anywhere useful. He could only hope that should any fallings out occur, or upsets happen, that they would use their words. That the bonds he was trying to foster within them would be strong enough for, as selfish as it was, he hoped to keep them close by. Since the loss of his parents, well, he knew that people would always come in and out of each other's lives, but he'd not built the kind of nest here in the Northern Echo for it to be empty, had he? "Now who's a sappy dopa? What happened to keeping your head down and not getting your hopes up?" He mentally chided himself, his head shaking lightly as he grabbed the paper bags he neatly folded the clothing into out of his wardrobe. It was still sparse, of course. That clothes shopping trip had been interesting, but nothing had convinced him that he needed to fill the space with items just for the sake of it. Most people, if they were honest, wore the same things every other day anyway, didn't they? Wasting money on such things would always be illogical to him, but he'd never begrudge people wanting to look and feel good. Just because he didn't particularly care what he looked like, shouldn't mean that other people should feel that way, of course. Humming, he checked the tots' impromptu presents, and all of the price tags gone, he took a quick look around his room, his eyes looking to his own #1 Get That mural with pride before making his way out the small, tidy, similarly empty room. However, before rushing off, he gave their living space a swift check and then headed through to what used to be a separate apartment and jogged down the back stairs. Once he reached the bottom, he carefully opened the door, which stopped the cats from scrambling up to their living quarters. The paper bags he carried kept in one hand. He made sure there were no feline family members near the barrier whilst he pushed at it. "Hi there, Red Riot," he greeted, the kitten being the only occupant of the room, his adorably whiskered face momentarily looking up from the water dish he was lapping at to acknowledge him, his smile widening as the dark russet cat then went back to drink some more, before skittering towards and through one of the cat flaps, no doubt eager to get back to playing. Damn, he was glad that they were all enjoying their new home. Then, his gaze looking to the litter trays, he ensured there was enough water in the bowls placed far from the currently empty food bowls before heading out. Entering the cafe proper, he took a moment to just soak everything in. Dabi, Spinner, and Tomer were playing through some kind of RPG with Katsuki, and Hitoshi offering tips and playing lookout with Ochako. He was beyond pleased that the boys were including her in their games. Something told him that the positive attention, praise, and acceptance by an older peer or peers was something that she'd been looking for since, for most of her life, her parents, as wonderful as they were, had probably been running themselves ragged trying to make ends meet. Living with a mother who was ill, but was doing better every day, according to Ryo-san, was probably still weighing heavy on her as well. He was so glad that she could come here to forget about the struggles she'd lived through, even just for a little while. Small mercies. Then, his eyes going back to the study area, he chuckled a little as he watched Mirai praised to use biology project, whilst Eijiro and Denki crowded the still cave-wearing Doshinori.
But, boys, look at all of this progress. I should imagine your parents are thrilled. Well done, indeed.
He was such a ham. It was admittedly adorable, wasn't it? However, with a blink, he realized that Izuku wasn't with his friends or the teens. Feeling a strange parental sense of concern well up in him, he quickly and quietly made his way around into the eatery proper, his concern fizzling away when he found the boy, his mother, and Tomoko chatting by the service bar with Mitsuki. The crimson-eyed blonde was taking a photo of the three together, the young pro having donned her costume makeup for the picture. The freckled-eyed smile was just as luminous as his mother's. The Team Mom shirts had been long overdue, hadn't they?
Shoni, there you are!
Blinking, he turned to look behind him where Katsuki and Itoshi had bounded over to bark at him, the pair having shared a mischievous glance upon approach. Adorable and concerning, and never bored so much for his attention at the same time, had they? He smiled at them, because why wouldn't he?
Sorry, I was just checking on a few things upstairs.
He explained, the bags in his hand appearing in his mind, an idea forming.
Can I get you guys anything?
It'd be great to have a group photo outside, wouldn't it? It was now 1840, and all of the other customers were nearly finished or on their way out. The MU students had pouted at the early closure, but Anne told him it was fine. He'd successfully gotten them addicted to the place and would just have to sulk until they could come back tomorrow night. Such good kids. It was a lovely evening. Just right for snapping a memory, considering that all of the local pros were here. Nemori, Hisashi, and Oboro were lounging in a booth, the last dish of takoyaki being slowly but surely demolished between them. The awesome foursome would be heading out on patrol when it closed up. He wanted them rested and fed before they went. They were there, along with the older pros and sidekicks. He'd wrapped up a few scones for Centipeter and passed them to him with the instructions that he go and see his folks with them. The insect quirk demanded, hugged him quite tightly, thanked him, and promised him that he would.
Huh? Well, it's funny that you should offer that, Shoni.
The fiery blonde tried to smile. Tried, as in he'd never seen a more devilishly pleased expression on a child's face before.
Can you come with us a sec, please?
Midoriya Inko would be the first to admit that she didn't believe in fairy tales. Sure, as a young girl with hopes of potentially becoming a hero, she'd been a little starry-eyed, naive. She still kept her green suit wrapped up and hidden though it was in the top of her wardrobe. She'd hoped to one day maybe pass it on to a daughter if she'd had one. At 28, it was still possible, perhaps. But considering that her quirk had never developed further, that the man she'd fallen desperately in love with didn't love her back, her son so full of ambitions for his own future had been born quirkless, well, she'd pretty much given up on the whole idea of knights in shining armor, dreams come true, and happily after, until quite out of the blue, at one of her lowest points, she had been approached by a man. He'd been young, handsome, concerned. He'd not laughed at her tears. He'd not judged her weakness. He'd just picked up her bags, helped her up, and taken her to the newly refurbished cafe he was working on. At the time, part of her mind had been screaming at her, how could she be so stupid? Why would she trust a stranger? Did she want to get raped and murdered? A nasty, cruel voice that sounded just like Hisashi had snickered at her. Who'd want to touch you? You've put on a few pounds since your failure of a son proved how worthless he is. He couldn't even attain a quirk. That'd be your fault, you know. However, she'd entered the eatery. He'd led her to a booth and given her the best coffee she'd ever had. He'd whipped her up a delicious meal. He'd boxed up more besides to feed her and her son for a few days. He'd walked her back to her apartment. He'd glared at the nattering biddies who liked to judge her. He'd carried the bags, unloaded them in the kitchen, and made such a sweet, wonderful fuss of Izuku when he'd left his room to investigate. It was from that day onwards that Aizawa Shouta had helped her to believe again. He'd shown her some single-parent schemes he'd come across during his child-minding training. He'd promised both of them meals, free of charge, until she was financially more stable. He had changed their whole world for the better, and now here she was, the weight she'd initially gained behind her, a promise of gaining accredited self-defense skills on the horizon, and best of all, her beautiful, wonderful son wasn't just happy. He was thriving. He was progressing. He was loved and valued by people who called him friend, little brother, and Izuku Shonen. God! Sometimes late at night, her son tucked up in bed, his head filled with dreams of a hero agency where he could be a doctor, a quirk specialist, anything he wanted. She found herself praying. She wasn't particularly religious, but she couldn't help the thanks she whispered to the universe, her mind haunted by the terrible could-have-beens and Shouta not entering their lives could have brought. Mom, are you okay? Blinking, Inko laughed and turned to her son, his body securely held by a similarly concerned-looking Tomoko. Oh, honey, sorry. I'm fine, she promised. I'm just so happy, aren't you? She asked, her smile resplendent. Ah, and would you look at you two, Tomu-chan? You truly do look like a sister, you know. Inko-chan! The younger girl grinned widely, her body dancing a little behind the bar to Izuku's mouthing delight. You're much too young and beautiful to have a daughter my age, she complimented fondly, her words causing her to blush and Mitsuki to nod approvingly. Ah, but there's no denying that Isuzu is my adorable little bro either now, is there? She breathed, her cheeks squished against his as he giggled and leaned into the affectionate gesture happily. Aww! I'm not quite sure what you mean. Sitting in the cat maintenance room, Katsuki and Itoshi stood before him with their smartphones. Shouta lifted his hands a little and curled his fingers inward. What is the noise you want me to make again? Snickering. You could tell that somewhere along the line his teens had a hand in this cat filter business. The boys shared another impish glance before his ward copied the hand gestures and cocked his head to the side. Like this. Nya. See? Watching and trying his best not to laugh. He similarly cocked his head, fully aware that the blonde's foam was drained on him, and tried again. Yeah, he said, and then with a blink sneezed. Sorry, What? Don't be! The explosion quirk user offered, his expression elated. Take a look! Humming, he carefully took the child's phone and raised a brow at the 10-second video, his smile broadening, for there, his cook's cap bracketed by a pair of black fur-lined pink-centered cat ears, his cheeks sporting whispers. He saw his curious features tilt to the side before he said, Nya. At the word, his loosely closed hands turned to paws and his eyes became glittery. His sneezing face somehow caused the kanji for so cute to rainbow banner over his head and under his chin, too. Wow. Oh, that's great. Come on. Davini's gonna lose his mind when he sees this. Davini? Eh? That's surprising. Juggling, he got up and followed them out. All of the cats were still in the enclosure, and so, his bags in hand, he watched as they ran to their oldest big brother before approaching the smaller, currently unused study table. Then, his hands grabbing out the different colors of shirt, he placed them onto the previously wiped down table and nodded to himself. He thought that he'd picked wisely. 2 green ones for Sue and Izuku, pink for Ochako, 2 red for Eijiro and Katsuki, purple for Hitoshi, and yellow for Denki. Then, pulling out his smartphone, he texted the 2 mothers at the front of the cafe and the bros. Aizawa Shouta. Hey guys, I'd like to do a group photo outside if you're all okay with it.